Hello and welcome. This is the RLAS webinar series, Module 1, and today we're going to be talking about leadership to support evidence-based practices. My name is Greg Ahrens, University of California, San Diego. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in just a minute. But first, I wanted to acknowledge the funding and support for this work. So the webinar and the work of the related project in New Mexico is funded by the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, and we really appreciate the support of the NICHD in this work in improving the lives of children and adolescents. So a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, my name is Greg Ahrens. I am a clinical and organizational psychologist by training. I am a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego, where I work with other faculty interested in how we implement and sustain best practices and evidence-based practices for the benefit of consumers, patients, and clients and students. I'm also a director of the Child and Adolescent Services Research Center, which is a consortium of researchers where we focus on improving care in real-world settings, including schools, other public sector systems like child welfare, mental health, juvenile justice, and substance abuse treatment. And the focus really is on improving the lives of those who would benefit from the services that we deliver. One of the areas that I specialize in is in leadership and organizational change to support implementation and sustainment of evidence-based practices. So when I think about implementation and sustainment, I think we really need to begin with thinking about sustainment and keeping sustainment in mind. So the long-term goal is to bring evidence-based, promising, and effective practices into public sector settings, including schools, where they're going to really help the children and adolescents and families who would really benefit from these. So the goal is to have them implemented with a level of fidelity and in a way that's going to engage both service systems, schools, providers, and clients in improving care. So the approach that I take, again, thinks about the context in which practices are to be implemented, as well as considering and supporting those who are leading, those who are implementing, and those who are receiving services. The objectives for today's talk are really to first describe what's called the full range leadership model. And the full range leadership model has a number of components that we're going to talk about, but we're going to focus on the core characteristics of transformational leadership from the full range model. Then we're also going to talk about and think about this new construct, this newer approach that we've been developing that focuses on implementation leadership. And we'll talk about the specific components and how the full range model works alongside, hand in hand, with implementation leadership to improve the implementation and sustainment of evidence-based care. And the question often arises, why do we focus on leadership but not management, or not just management? And really, when we think about management, we think about kind of the structures and processes. So how managers plan, direct, and control actions and what's happening in an organization or system. Managers monitor alignment with requirements that organize a structure to carry out plans. When we think about leadership, we think about a little higher level, a more engaged approach that promotes change to meet the shifting needs of population and settings, envisions and communicates vision about new directions, and motivates others to move in new directions. So how do you really engage people, get people enthusiastic, get them excited in thinking about how to move forward and how to improve care? And leadership that inspires commitment, loyalty, and involvement to accomplish a mission. And in the case of RLAS, we're thinking about the mission of improving care for youth in school settings. So this begs the question of, just what is good leadership? And, we may have a picture of leadership, or we may see one kind of leadership as illustrated down in this lower left cartoon, this is impressive, but I'm not sure it qualifies as workplace leadership. And so we're going to think about what ideal leadership might be like. So this is, when we're presenting in person, we really have some interaction where we ask participants to think of a leader who has influenced them. So identify a person, and then think of their behaviors and attributes. And what is it about that person that made them an influential leader? And then think about not only their leadership style, their leadership approach, and their leadership behaviors, but what was their impact? What were their interactions like with others? And what were their interactions like with you? And how did that affect you in the workplace or wherever that leadership was manifested? So it could be in community setting, it could be, in other activities, in volunteer activities, and other work activities, and family activities. So the goal of this exercise is really to think about your definition of leadership and how does this ideal leader, what you would think of as an ideal leader, embody that definition of leadership. So, as we go through, it'll be helpful, I think, to think about how your vision of an effective leader fits with these ideals of the full range leadership model and implementation leadership as we go forward. And as we go through the talk, I'm going to talk about different aspects of full range leadership, different aspects of implementation leadership, and some of those will illustrate with some examples, and we also have some video clips where we'll look at examples of often subpar leadership, so what's missing in this leadership, as well as positive leadership in some of the other examples. So that's what we can look forward to as we go forward through the seminar. So the idea of full range leadership really came from a couple of researchers, Bernie Bass and Bruce Avolio, and we utilize the full range leadership model in our work because it is focused on organizational change, and it's focused on moving and motivating people for positive change. Bass and Avolio and many others have looked at full range leadership in the US, in many other countries, in all kinds of settings, and all kinds of industries. So in business, in management, in manufacturing, in service industries, in human services, in child welfare, in mental health, in substance abuse treatment, and in school settings. And there's been evidence of effectiveness found and published in peer-reviewed literature for the full range model across organizations, across cultures, and in these different service settings that I've mentioned. The full range leadership model also has field-tested training materials and resources. So in our work where we train leaders in implementation leadership and to lead initiatives on implementing evidence-based care and evidence-informed care, we have adapted some of those training materials in building our approach that we call leadership and organizational change for implementation model that was developed with funding and support from the National Institutes of Health. So let's talk a little bit more about the full range leadership model and the dimensions. So as you can see in this slide, there are 3 dimensions of the full range leadership model, and going from the least effective at the bottom to the most effective here at the top, and from the more passive approaches to the more active approaches, we have laissez-faire, or what we call often passive avoidant leadership, which is really the leader who is not engaged in change, who's really not participating or not participating well. And transactional leadership, which is more about interactions and reinforcements. So there's some aspects of management that seem to fit well with transactional leadership. And then transformational leadership, which is much more kind of visionary and moving forward and engaging and stimulating. So now we're going to talk about each of those dimensions briefly. So laissez-faire leadership is characterized by the leader who's frequently absent, just may not show up, is indifferent to what's happening, and may avoid taking a stand on important issues or intervening when they should intervene. And so, the refrain from intervening or the delay from intervening, it's this motto of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's like waiting till things really go awry, or even then, it may be too late to intervene effectively. And I think, our little picture here on the right won't change the role here. It's just, an example. You see something, it's like, see something, say something. See something and take care of it. If there's something to be fixed, engaged. And the laissez-faire leader really does not do that. And so I think we have one clip that's an example of laissez-faire leadership. So, Michael Scott is a great example of not only many aspects of inappropriate leader behavior, but also laissez-faire. So, having messages come in from corporate, ignoring those, focused on their own agenda, not really focused on the task at hand, and not engaged in solving problems and making programs, agencies, schools run efficiently. So the laissez-faire leader really lacks that active engagement that's important for effective leadership. The next dimension that we showed earlier was this idea of transactional leadership. And related to that laissez-faire leadership is what we call passive management by exception. And management by exception means attending to monitoring, attending to certain standards, and intervening when things go kind of off track. Passive management by exception is exactly that. It means not actively monitoring, but taking an ineffective approach to monitoring of actions. It's setting standards, which may be the leader's own standards, or kind of standards of the organization or the workplace, but waiting for problems to arise and then not intervening effectively, intervening reluctantly. And so the passive management by exception may really call, on a leader who waits till things go awry, and they may have some responsibility for those actions, but they may blame it on others, for example, rather than taking action themselves. So not seeing that it's their own inaction that may lead to a crisis or may lead to a problem in operations of their organization. So I think we have an example of that from an early movie with Tom Hanks. So here we go.
Oh, good morning, Dee Dee.
Hi, Joe. What's with the shoe?
I'm losing my soul.
Yeah. How you doing?
Feel kind of tired.
Yeah. Yeah, each one gets sent 5 catalogs.
Oh, can't do it.
Why not?
I only got 12 catalogs left altogether.
Okay.
I'll take care of this.
Yes, Mr. Watson.
How you doing, Joe?
Well, I'm not feeling very good, Mr. Waturi.
Huh. So what else is new? You never feel good.
Yeah, well, that's a problem, yeah. Anyway, I have a doctor's appointment today.
Another doctor's appointment?
Yeah.
Listen, Joe, what's this Steve tells me about the catalogs?
Well, you only got 12.
How did you let us get down to 12?
I told you.
When?
3 weeks ago and then 2 weeks ago.
Did you tell me last week?
No.
Why not?
I don't know. I thought you knew.
Not good enough, Joe. Not nearly good enough. I put you in charge of the entire advertising library.
Ah, you mean this room.
I give you carte blanche how to deal with the materials in here.
You put the orders in the printer, Mr. Wattori, not me. That's how you wanted it.
You are not competent to put the orders into the printer. That's a very technical
I thought you were
job.
gonna explain it.
I was going to do better than that, Joe. I was going to make you assistant manager. I want to make you assistant manager, but you're not flexible. You're inflexible.
I don't feel inflexible.
You're inflexible. Totally. And what's this about a doctor's appointment? You're always going to the doctor.
I don't feel good.
So what? You think I feel good? Nobody feels good. After childhood, it's a fact of life. I feel rotten. So what? I don't let it bother me. I don't let it interfere with my job.
What do you want from me, Mr. Wattori?
You're like a child. And what's this lamp for? Is there not enough light in here for you?
The fluorescents affect me. They make me feel blotchy, puffy. I thought this light would.
Get rid of the light. This is not your bedroom, Joe. This is an office. Maybe if you start treating this like a job instead of some kind of a welfare hospital, you'll shape up. And Joe, I want those catalogs.
Then please order them.
Watch yourself, Joe. Think about what I just said. You've got to get yourself into a flexible frame, or else you are no place. And take that light off the desk.
I will.
Do it now. Good.
So in this example, I mean, still, yes, Joe is responsible for getting those catalogs, but Mr. Waturi had the ultimate responsibility, but pawned that off on Joe and dealt with other issues. And there's some other aspects of this in terms of leadership that are also troubling. We're going to talk about things like individualized consideration later on that Mr. Waturi does not demonstrate. But this idea of, passive management by exception, or waiting till problems arise, it's not a very effective leadership strategy in general or for implementation. So let's move on and talk about transactional leadership now. So as I mentioned, transactional leadership really, in terms of the leadership dimensions, kind of falls a little bit in the management area, but also in the leadership area, as I described earlier. And the idea of transactional leadership, as it shows here, is to motivate followers through rewards and sanctions. And so the first dimension, the main dimension, is contingent reward. So, really by rewarding and reinforcing what we'd like to see in people that we're working with, we can clarify the desired outcomes that we're looking for. And it can exchange rewards and recognition for accomplishments. And these are part of what we call the climate for evidence-based practice. It really is, recognizing, rewarding, supporting the implementation of evidence-based and evidence-informed care. And that fits under this idea of contingent reward. Reward is contingent on effective behavior and kind of the behaviors that support the mission of your organization, of your school, of your initiative. And so we have just a very brief clip that kind of illustrates that, kind of from Cesar Millan's perspective. Here we go.
God, he almost knows there's an invisible line there, doesn't he?
Yeah, very good. That's right. Then you're back. That's right. And you don't have to give affection all the time.
So I think in this very short clip, Caesar sums it up. You know, you're providing reward, you're providing reinforcement. There's lots of different kinds of reinforcement, you know, pat on the back, recognition, a certificate, you know, recognition, verbalizing how well someone's doing to others, showing the importance of that person on the team. And you don't have to do this all the time. And, you know, I think leaders who do this like all the time and it's not tied to specific actions, then it's going to be less effective most likely, because we want contingent reward to be based on effective actions and people actually kind of pitching in and doing well. So just as we talked about management by exception in the passive sense, there's also active management by exception. And this is a little more complicated than passive. You know, in general, passive management by exception is just ineffective. For management by exception in the active sense, it's really about having enough of this attending to standards. So we don't want to have too little, we don't want to have too much. So, you know, if you think about someone who, you know, harps on details and really kind of comes down hard on people when they deviate from expectations all the time, no matter what, even small deviations without a measured response, that can be too much. By the same token, if you move to the kind of more passive side of management by exception, you're not demonstrating selective attention to deviations that really help inform staff what's expected and supported. It's difficult to correct problems when detected unless you have a measured approach. So identifying the problems and then having an appropriate response with the staff, with people you're working with, so that you're bringing it to their attention and helping to facilitate their corrective action, you know, rather than just being punitive. But sometimes you also need to set and enforce rules. And so, you know, having that measured response that's appropriate to the situation is necessary. And sometimes those types of responses can be somewhat dictated by organizational policies and practices. But often there's latitude. Leaders have latitude in how they apply management by exception. So let's look at one example of kind of over-the-top management by exception. And notice that, you know, this person is so over the top that people in the background just get out of the way or go the other direction also when they see that this person is kind of on the warpath. So here we go.
Why it's so difficult to confirm an appointment.
No, I'm so sorry, Miranda. I actually did confirm
Details
last night.
of your incompetence do not interest me. Tell Simone I'm not going to prove that girl that she sent me for the Brazilian layout. I asked for clean, athletic, smiling. She sent me dirty, tired, and paunchy. And RSVP, yes, the Michael Kors party. I want the driver to drop me off at 9:30 and pick me up at 9:45.
So there you have a rather intense approach to management by exception active, and everybody in the workplace knows it. And so, you know, this is how, you know, leadership is communicated by behaviors. And I'll just interject at this point that our approach to leadership is that it really is focused on behaviors. There's a lot of debate and discussion about whether leaders are born or made, but our approach is one where we believe that we can work with leaders and change their behaviors, that, you know, your behaviors aren't written in stone, and that with the right attention to how you're interacting and how much you want to take on some of these characteristics or not, that you can shape your behavior, and that leader behavior can be shaped to help support evidence-based practices. And so in our work on our leadership and organizational change for implementation approach, we do just that. And we work with leaders in schools, in mental health, in substance abuse and child welfare around effective leadership for implementation. So let's talk about transformational leadership. So this is the more kind of charismatic end of the dimensions of full range leadership. And it really is about that motivational aspect. So the leader motivates others through enactment of positive values. So this idea of ethical or idealized leadership, there's an emphasis on inspiration and appealing to kind of higher order needs. So it's really about what are the broader goals? What are we trying to accomplish? How do we want to improve the school climate? How do we want to improve the lives of students? How do we want to help our students be most effective? What's that kind of end goal? Is to really help set the stage for improvement that students can carry through the rest of their lives. So, you know, when we're thinking about leadership for implementation and why transformational leadership, it helps to set that vision. And importantly, transformational leadership has shown to be effective in improving context in school settings. So there is precedent for that. And, you know, as I mentioned, as one of the areas where the full range leadership model has shown to be important and effective. So there are 4 components to transformation leadership, and we call these the 4 I's. So individualized consideration, intellectual stimulation, idealized influence, and inspirational motivation. So let's take a quick look at each of these. So in terms of individualized consideration, it's really paying attention to the needs of those that you are leading, that you're working with. So paying attention to individual strengths, weaknesses, and needs, acting as a role model, a mentor, or coach, but not just from your agenda, but from understanding others' needs and what would be engaging for them in terms of, you know, how you bring them into the process and support your team in the process of implementation. And so you can use individualized strategies to communicate and motivate the team. So there's kind of the whole team, but within that, the individual members, what they bring to the table, how you can support them, what members of, you know, identifying what members of the team might be able to help in that mission, something we call implementation citizenship behavior, those that go kind of above and beyond to support an initiative. And so we have a clip of, I think, the lack of individualized consideration from the movie Office Space. So we'll show this really quickly.
F C E.
Hi, Milton.
But
What's happening?
I didn't receive my paycheck this week.
You're gonna have to talk to payroll about that.
I did, and they said...
Milt, we're gonna need to go ahead and move you downstairs into storage B.
No,
We
I was told I
have
could
some
not.
new people coming in, and
No,
we need all the
there's-
space we can get.
But there's no space.
So if you could just go ahead and pack up your stuff and move it down there,
But no,
that would be terrific.
I was told
Okay.
I could stay. Excuse me. Yeah, I believe you have my stapler.
So we have a lack of consideration of Milton's needs, you know, his perspective, to the point of not even letting him talk. So, you know, we hope our individually considerate leaders are really paying attention to the needs of people on their team and how they fit together to support, you know, the mission that you're trying to accomplish. So the next dimension is intellectual stimulation. And this is really, it's not about you getting excited, although that can help, but it's about encouraging staff members, encouraging those you work with to get excited, to problem solve, to think about solving the issues that can improve care and improve the lives of the students that you work with. And what you want to do is create an environment that's safe for questioning. So Amy Edmondson at the Harvard Business School talks about this as psychological safety climate. Do people feel safe generating their ideas, sharing those ideas, brainstorming, problem solving, and really engaging in thinking about how to improve things? And sometimes you have to work with people for quite a while to get to that aha moment where someone starts to understand. And so we have an example of that in this next clip.
Now show me. Sand the floor. How did you do that? Shut up! Sand the floor. Stand up. Show me sand floor. Sand floor. Sand floor. Big sucker. Sand floor. Sand floor. Yes. Now show me wax on, wax off. Hey.
Wax on, wax off.
Wax on, wax off. Hey, wax on, hot. Wax off, hot. Concentrate. Look at my eye. Lock a hand. Thumb inside. Wax on, hot. Wax off, hot. Wax on, hot. Wax off, hot. Wax on. Wax off. Show me penta fence. Up, down. Up, down. Up, down. Other side. Look eye. Always look eye. Show me penthouse. Side, side. Lock wrist. Side, side. Side, side. Yes. Show me wax on, wax off. That! 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 Show me pentafence. That! Face! That! That! Show me side to side. Yes! That! 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 Show me sand or floor. That! 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 Yes! Stop! Stop! Oi. Look, I always look, I come back tomorrow.
So for intellectual stimulation, we're not just sharing our ideas, but we're engaging the people that we work with. And we're searching for this aha moment, this glimmer, this glint in people's eyes that say, oh, I get this, I'm interested in this, I'm excited about this. And so we're trying to build that engagement through intellectual stimulation. Now, some people think of this inspirational motivation as kind of the most key to this aspect of the full range model. And that's really to kind of build that vision and build that buy-in and support so that people will be inspired, motivated, as it says in the name, and really be on board. So presenting an attainable and desirable vision of what you're trying to accomplish, articulating, stating the values of the team and helping members place their actions in the context of larger goals. So why are we engaging in this? Why are we doing these things? What does it mean? So if we're bringing in new models, if we're trying to understand how best to help our students, what does that mean for those students, for their performance in school, for their performance in the community, for how they develop and grow as youth into adults and carry on through their life. So the inspirational motivation is really about that bigger vision. And sometimes, it's articulating that vision in a way that's understandable. So we have another example here of articulating, the meaning of an event and inspirational motivation. You have this impassioned plea, this role modeling of stating why an initiative is important and how you really bring that and articulate that can be really important to getting people on board. So, I would challenge you all to think about how you communicate the messages about what's important in your school setting, what's important in organizational setting, and how you articulate that and get people on board in thinking about that. And that's really highly related to this idea of idealized influence. So, idealized influence being, someone who you'd want to emulate, who would serve as a role model, who would serve as an inspiration. And often this is related to really strong ethical behavior and serving as a role model for your team. And I think this example of Malala Yousafzai is a great one.
Education went from being right to being a crime. Girls were stopped from going to school. When my world suddenly changed, my priorities changed too. I had options. One was to remain silent and wait to be killed. And the second was to speak up and then be killed. I chose the second one. I decided to speak up.
So I don't think we need to say a whole lot more about this one, because Malala is that role model, that person who really stood up for an important cause, suffered consequences, and is carrying on. And really, you know, when you think about these ideas of inspirational motivation, individualized consideration, you know, at this Nobel Prize award ceremony, you know, she brought other girls and young women from other countries who had also experienced similar things. So really thinking about the needs more globally with others, and not just her own situation, but thinking about what that means for others involved, for, you know, students and girls who want to have an education in these other countries. So just a really powerful message here. So, you know, when we think about transformational leadership, it occurs when leaders generate awareness and acceptance of the mission of the team and school, and when they broaden and elevate the interests of the team. So what does this mean for students in general? What we're going to learn in this project, in the RLAS project, you know, how will that generate? How can that be shared after, you know, as we go through this project, how will that be shared with other schools, other school districts in New Mexico, in the United States, and even more broadly? This can really serve and have a bigger mission and vision. And so when leaders stimulate staff to look beyond kind of their own kind of day-to-day self-interest, yes, we have our own personal and family issues, we have our work issues, but what is the meaning of the RLAS initiative? How can we articulate the importance of that to others and really kind of get that buy-in, both for ourselves and help support our teams in buying in? So when we think about, you know, reactions to transformational leadership behaviors for intellectual stimulation, you know, we would want engaged, you know, staff engaged in critical thinking. For inspirational motivation, having a willingness to excel. You know, I want to do better. I want to help with this initiative. Individualized consideration, focusing on their own development, professional, personal development and skills, and this idealized influence issue, willing to trust and emulate the leader. So, you know, thinking, what can I do as a leader to be someone that others want to emulate? How can I really impart those values? How can I demonstrate my commitment? So, you know, the results, the school results of transformational leadership can be, you know, new ideas and empowerment from intellectual stimulation, in using inspirational motivation to overcoming resistance to change, individualized consideration to focus on individual team members and persons' needs to motivate and encourage them, and for idealized influence, having the confidence in the vision of where we're going. And transformational leadership strategies you can use, there are many, but here are a few strategies to support implementation are, for example, reacting to setbacks by effectively problem solving, engaging the team, so using intellectual stimulation, admitting when things are puzzling, not going as planned, and inviting the input of others, so that psychological safety climate that we talked about, using idealized influence and intellectual stimulation, and pointing out exemplary efforts towards implementation through individualized consideration, and that idea of kind of recognition and rewards that we talked about earlier. Being a role model of positive attitudes for implementing strategies for LGBTQ students. So again, using idealized influence, using inspirational motivation to regularly talk up the RLAS project, get excited about it, and really be able to articulate why it's important and how it's going to help students. And then tie in the importance of proven effectiveness of strategies to the larger goal of improving student outcomes. So how is this whole project really going to help with student outcomes? So in our remaining time, we're going to talk a little bit about implementation leadership. And I don't have any video clips to share on these, but we'll go through them fairly quickly. The 5 components to implementation leadership, and these are complementary with full range leadership, is knowledgeable leadership, supportive leadership, proactive leadership, being perseverant, and being available to staff. So for the first, being knowledgeable. So how can you demonstrate being knowledgeable? And again, what we want for all of these dimensions, both of full range and for implementation leadership, is that it's not necessarily your self-assessment that's most critical, but it's the people that you're leading, staff working with you, their perception of you. So their perception of you as knowledgeable about the RLAS project and why it's important. So you can attend trainings and participate in webinars for implementing recommended CDC strategies to improve school climate for LGBTQ youth, and then share that information with your staff so that they can understand your depth of knowledge. Encouraging staff to use your school's implementation resource team for working to improve school climate for LGBTQ youth, and utilizing the RLAS coaches to get information and knowledge regarding LGBTQ youth to share with school staff. So really demonstrating your breadth and depth of knowledge about the issues facing LGBTQ youth, the strategies, what resources are available, and how you can go about that. In terms of supportive leadership, again, you can point out exemplary efforts towards implementation, and that also links back to the idea of individualized consideration. You can support your team in demonstrating positive attitudes towards strategies being used in your school. So, often in change efforts, there may be some resistance or some concern. So, you can be supportive of staff, but also demonstrating those positive attitudes and that, and really, giving the message that this type of initiative can be successful and it can really help the students in your school setting. In terms of proactive leadership, you can work with school leadership to develop a plan for implementation before it begins. Be flexible in solving implementation challenges. And this, to me, is key, because once we start on a project, going down this road, challenges will arise. And it's kind of that perseverance that we're going to talk about in a minute, and problem solving and being proactive that can really help to address that. So if you think of the full range model, we want to avoid the laissez-faire and passive approach and be more active in solving implementation challenges. And you can talk with your staff about the plan for implementation before it begins, kind of prep them ahead of time, listen to feedback about potential issues, and use that intellectual stimulation from the full range model to engage staff in thinking about those issues. How might we solve them? What path do we want to take in addressing issues as they arise? Being perseverant, so perseverant leadership. So, again, related to proactive, involving team members in troubleshooting when problems emerge. In the event of a crisis, you can ensure that the team returns to working on the goals of implementation as soon as the crisis is under control. And this is important in clinical care. When a crisis arises, you might address that and move back to the goals. If you're doing treatment or therapy, you're going to deal with the crisis, come back to the larger goals. In this case, the larger goals of reducing LGBTQ adolescent suicide through the RLAS program. And then finally, for implementation leadership, it's a matter also of being available. So encouraging an open door policy throughout the school, making sure that staff know how to get a hold of you and that you're available to the extent that you can be, and responding quickly when concerns arise. So once again, avoiding that passive dimension of the full range model, but being available, responding quickly, and addressing concerns at the earliest possible opportunity. And so those dimensions of implementation leadership, I think, fit nicely with the full range model. And these types of approaches are being used not just in your school setting. We're doing similar work around leadership and leadership for implementation in community mental health settings, in community mental health for autism spectrum disorders, in school settings for autism spectrum disorders. Our colleagues in Stockholm, Sweden are doing similar work with leadership for implementation in mental health, in occupational health. And so this idea of really using leadership to facilitate change and being somewhat deliberate about how we apply that, and thinking about how we apply these different aspects of full range leadership and implementation leadership as you go forward can be really helpful. And so you can be in touch with the study leaders and the project leaders about resources that may be available to you for understanding your own leadership. But if you just think of the full range dimensions and the implementation leadership dimensions and ask yourself, am I being proactive? Am I being individually considerate in this situation? Have I been able to achieve good intellectual stimulation on my team? Think about each of the dimensions and how you're applying those. That's how I think this presentation can be most useful. Understanding what the constructs are, what these different behaviors are, and then just ask yourself, am I enacting these? Am I demonstrating these? And are the actions I'm taking, will they really help with the RLAS initiative? And so I think that's can be helpful for you. And when I think about doing work on leadership, I think I really like this quote, that leadership should be born out of the understanding of the needs of those who would be affected by it. So that has to do with you, with your schools, with school leadership at all levels, from the principal to student leaders. Who would be affected by your leadership in these situations? All the people in the school, the students, and you have an opportunity to use your leadership to improve the lives of students that are wrestling with some very serious and tough issues. And so with that, I just want to acknowledge the school nurse reviewers, Beverly Bradley, Cynthia Greenberg, Beverly Hine, Jacqueline Kelly Romero, Kathy McDonald, and Lisa Patch. And thank my colleague Amy Green, who's one of the lead people on the project, for working with me on this presentation. And I just want to say thank you for your time. The PDF of these slides will be available. You'll be able to take a look at that. And so those will be made available shortly. Well, actually, while we're recording this, they'll be up for you to access. So thank you again for your time, and hope you have a great time working on this project, and that it's very fruitful for you and in your own personal and professional development.